Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves an interview with Steve Danuser and Morgan Day. So, Greg from Shack News, since the release of Dragonflight, you've given players a lot of different ways to experience the world, get gear, explore, and level up. What's it been like to, and what have you learned since the release that you're not implemented into patch 10.1? Morgan says, there was a tremendous amount of effort that the team put into Dragonflight. There's been so much positive feedback around all the different features, from the talent revamp to the profession revamp. Dragon riding has been an absolutely incredible addition to World of Warcraft, agree. That's something we've seen a lot of amazing player feedback from. That's a lot of things that we're looking to continue to update and expand upon in the Embers of Neltharion update. I can't talk about dragon riding for a minute because I love it so much. I can talk about dragon riding for a minute because I love it so much. I'm right there with him. Greatest addition to World of Warcraft ever. That's an area where we've had tons of positive feedback and are actually continuing to improve upon that in the Embers of Neltharion, where we're adding new dragon riding glyphs, and those glyphs are sprinkled throughout the Zaralak Cavern, as well as new races and new traits that you can use your glyphs to learn. There's a tremendous amount of effort that the team put into it, really just wanting to build upon that foundation that the team created with Dragonflight to launch. Steve, players have really responded to a lot of the characters in Dragonflight as well, both the major ones like the Aspects, Selexstrasza, and the others, as well as some of the smaller characters that tell more personal stories, and so you'll see that continuing in Embers of Neltharion as well. You'll get some of those smaller, quieter story moments combined with big, boisterous battles, and that is the hallmark of Warcraft. I will say those smaller, quieter stories, they sort of went missing for a while, and I'm glad that they're back. And immediately, when I say that, chat, what are you instantly thinking about when I say, what is an example of a smaller, quieter story moment in World of Warcraft for you? What would be an example of that? Instant thought. The dwarf dragon, just telling you a story. And I really hope that there's more of those little stories that just, it's just a story. And it's not from a major character. It's from a minor character that gives you a little bit more insights into the game. So I'm really looking forward to that. Michael from Esports. In terms of dungeons that are selected from season to season, do you try to tie in those into what is happening in the Dragonflight story? Morgan, definitely not a coincidence. There are 4 dungeons that are just the remaining Dragonflight dungeons that were not in Season 1 Mythic Plus. Naltheris, Uldaman, Halls of Infusion, and Braconite Hollow. That's 4 of the dungeons, and the other 4 are Underrot, Freehold, Neltharion's Lair, and Vortex Pinnacle. In terms of how that pool is chosen, it's a smattering of ideas and philosophies there. Neltharion's Lair, like you pointed out, there's definitely not a coincidence. Embers of Neltharion, we have a dungeon from Legion called Neltharion's Lair. It also has Drogbar in it, and they're making an appearance again in the Zaralak Cavern, so that one felt like a slam dunk. Also, Vortex Pinnacle also feels like it has some story beats and implications to follow up on there. But there are also some that are fan favorites. Freehold was one that we felt the player base, every time those community threads pop up around what dungeons do you want to see in Season 2, Freehold is mentioned in every one of those threads when they pop up. So being a fan favorite had to be included. Underrot, interestingly, we look at the Mythic Plus dungeon pool as a cohesive experience. The way we look at a raid as one cohesive experience, and we want to make sure that we have coverage in terms of what kinds of damage profiles are we asking you to do? What kind of utility are we asking you to use? And felt like Underrot has a lot of fun core WoW gameplay mechanics with interesting dispel profiles. So it really just helps to round out that seasonal package of what we had available for the players, trying to create the most varied experience possible while also looking for opportunities for story and narrative hits. Yeah, Underrot was definitely not fun, but I think I understand why they're doing this. Steve, narrative is one consideration, but it doesn't mean that all of these things are tied super tightly to the core story that's going on. Some of them can be thematic hits, and some of them are in there for other reasons, like Morgan said. So it's really a combination of what we're looking at, what dungeon to pick. Jess from Windows Central. Are there any thoughts on tweaking affixes in Season 2, especially with less popular affixes? For example, in our guild, whenever it's Tyrannical Week, people groan and are not super happy about it. Morgan. Tons of conversations around affixes. I actually love Tyrannical. Maybe I'm the weird one, but I love Tyrannical. That's the week where we really get to feel like there's progression and we really feel like we learn the ins and outs of all these boss mechanics. So I personally love Tyrannical. I get to spend some time on the bosses instead of spending time on the trash. In terms of the philosophy of affixes in particular for Season 2, we've definitely taken a big step back there and are looking at it holistically. One major change we're making is we're actually just not going to have a level 10. That is to say, the seasonal affix like Thundering. There won't be a replacement for Thundering, and Thundering is being retired. So at level 10, the scaling will continue to kick in, but there's no new affix there. Seasonal affixes were created as an idea, I want to say, back in Battle for Azeroth, where we had the same dungeon pool. We would add 1 or 2 dungeons here and there, but you could be playing the same dungeons for many, many seasons. And we really added those seasonal affixes to try to solve the problem of it feeling like dungeons were solved, like there was a specific route. There was a specific way everyone approached the dungeon. Seasonal affixes were there to mix that up and change the way you approach the dungeon. I don't feel like the affixes really did that. Am I just completely bonkers here and just completely wrong? But I don't feel like the affixes actually changed the way in which people approach the dungeons. I feel like it just made the dungeons a lot more tedious. Not all of them. Some of them obviously had some sort of impact on how you would play. But for the most part, a lot of them would just make it feel more tedious. You're now just tediously going through a lot more, like, effort to do the same fucking dungeon. It doesn't really change the playstyle much, other than just, oh, never mind, you know? Going to Dragonflight, we were like, well, we don't need to solve that problem anymore, but maybe there's a way to add some amount of gameplay that feels like more like a persistent element of the dungeon. But ultimately, we've heard a lot of feedback around complexity, like how much stuff do I have to know to do and what's going on, and how many wrenches are you going to throw at me? Not even just dodgeballs, but wrenches we're throwing at you that you have to dodge. Definitely taking a really close look at that with Season 2, so not doing the level 10 affix. Then we're really taking a closer look at the level 7 bucket and how much opportunity is there for counterplay. How much of that is making your healer's life harder versus how much of that is there an opportunity where if I play really well, I can negate this affix and use my utility really well, or whatever it may be. So we're definitely taking a look at the whole level 7 bucket, so really more along the lines of an affix refresh for that bucket, as well as no level 10 affix. On top of that, trust us, we've heard the feedback around, hey, when Season 2 rolls around, if you've done Brackenhide on Mythic 0 the first week, it was pretty hard. So definitely taking a close look at individual dungeons and probably cutting some things that are existing today in Mythic 0 and really asking, once affixes are in the mix, do you really need this build to have 3 creatures that all need to have a kick rotation or something like that? Very, very much we have been discussing that. All right. Wait, did the stream die? All right, so here we go. Robin from MMORPG. Cross-faction guilds seem to be indicating as coming in patch 10.9. Is that real? That is real. That will be on the PTR. The PTR is coming later this week, I believe, and that will be available day 1 on the PTR. We are quite excited about that, and that's just aligned with some of the philosophies that we've been discussing about cross-faction. We open up cross-faction parties. My raid group is a cross-faction raid group, and you know that conversation of, gosh, it would be neat to have people in my guild, and we are trying to be really considerate with those changes, and watching where we step as we make changes there, because we recognize the impact that has on not just our community, but the game itself. Factions, Alliance, and Horde are a huge part of World of Warcraft. Even if I can play with people on the other faction, the tremendous weight that they have, even in the story, or especially in the story, is something that will never go away in World of Warcraft. I don't understand this insistence on holding on to the factions, even though at this point, bro, you have cross-faction guilds. can you still realistically have factions? When players are now in the same guilds with each other, do factions still actually make sense? In my opinion, no. It really doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's fine if it's an ideological decision, but I keep coming back to ideological decisions still have to make sense in the real world. And if you're gonna have orcs and humans play in the same guild, they can't really be in different factions unless those factions are purely cosmetic. Like, what kind of big story moment are you gonna actually tell here? You know, let's say the Horde and the Alliance declare war on one another again. What happens to those guilds? You now just have Alliance players that happen to fight alongside Horde players, even though they're technically at war with one another. So you can't ever really have that again, right? That is over. All right, so Amy at Blizzard Watch. The new Zaralak Caverns zones have a bunch of features like snail riding, 3 biomes, and more activity with the Niffin. What was the process of deciding on that new zone, the features, and the gameplay? We do try to, when we're looking at our updates that we're planning to make to the game, we do try to put things together that feels like they complement one another. The features and the story are all accentuating the themes that we have through all of it. When we knew that we were pursuing Neltharion secrets in this underground space, we talked about the kinds of denizens we would run into, the kinds of things that we would want to offer players so that they could do, and obviously we knew things that is such a popular feature for the outdoor spaces, and we thought, what could we do with that in an underground space that puts a different spin on it, but yet gives you that safe feeling of freedom? We designed the zone in a way to feel very grand and have lots of openings, but also places that you can swoop in and run some tight corners and get low to the ground, and that became a way to inform the addition to dragon riding, where the new ability that you can earn is that you can pick up your resource when you're near the ground. So it all ties together in that way. The storyline and the characters that are all involved, all those choices go into putting together this update that feels like it's telling this cohesive experience. Those are some of the things that we do when we're talking about the different options that we have. How do we condense that coolness down into something that is very thematic as a whole and tells this great story in the social space that our artists have given us to plan? And then Morgan says, for those crafty players who look at data mining and stuff, they may have seen hints of an underground zone in some of our earlier betas. As Steve said, this was very much in the plan from the beginning. This is the direction that we really felt the story has been taking us this whole time, and getting the Embers of Neltharion into the player's hands, they can kind of see the progression of things like the Incarnates and their release in the vaults of the Incarnates. And how this is going to impact us and where their stories are going to take us is a huge part of this update. One thing that we haven't even spoken about yet. Iridacron is protected by the earth because he is the elemental incarnate of earth. We are now underground, so there's a very good chance that Iridacron is close by, or at least seemingly going to make an appearance in this specific expansion. So Elizabeth says, can you tell us about the revival catalyst in 10.1? It will still be there, although we have had a lot of conversation around player expectations around their set bonuses. Once upon a time back in Legion, when you had sets, they were looked at as more aspirational, like it was a goal that would take a while to pursue and achieve. More and more, as we've seen with the community, especially with how transformative and impactful your sets can be, it started to feel less like a chase goal and more like something that I am more complete without this thing. I am more complete without this thing. There is kind of an expectation around it. So we are making some changes. Not exactly around the revival catalyst, but we've definitely discussed how are ways that we can add more determinism and more bad luck protection to people's acquisition of their set bonuses. I believe we might even have a blog coming out sometime in the next few days or later in the week that discusses this exact topic. So there's definitely been conversation around this, and we're always looking to evolve based on player feedback, and this is one of those areas that has been discussed a lot. Don't worry, was the force or pressure. They are different. In my mind, the earth, I think the motion of it. you could, if you separate the player from the faction war directly by, say, going back to neutral ground of order holes. It would be some work, but it should be possible. Yeah, but that would be a lot of work, because you're not just talking about order holes, right? Which was very much based around your class. Now you're talking about classes from all over in a specific guild. So to make guilds a sort of neutral ground, I think would be very difficult. Nothing so far in this interview really blows me away. Thomas Hernandez from Blizz Planet, you mentioned a new Blue Dragonflight story quest. Can you talk about those? And will Rathian and Abyssian have their own story continuations? Okay, so Steve Danuser says, this is where we finally get to some interesting stuff. Embers of Neltharion, as the name implies, deals a lot with the legacy that Neltharion left behind on his path from the Earthwater, this noble protector of Dragonflight and of Azeroth as a whole, down to Deathwing. And this is a way that we can peek into that history and learn some of that progression. We've seen the end results of what he became, but this is a chance to tell that story, which plays out in a number of ways. Some of these are with the Drakthir, his creation, and Aberrus, the raid space that we will be adventuring in, the place where the Drakthir were first created. We get to delve into that history and see it come to life in one of the encounters, and that's really cool. Besides the Drakthir and the legacy that they're chasing, we know that Sarkareth, the leader of the Sundered Flame, a breakaway group of Drakthir, has become a force of antagonism. We're telling their story, and how he is chasing that kind of power that he feels Neltharion owes to him. And on the other side of that coin is Emberthal, one of the noble Drakthir who lost the one that she led. Now she's looking for a purpose and helping her people find their fate, and all of that is intertwined with this destiny that Neltharion once had for them. In addition to that, we have the Black Dragonflight, which, as you pointed out, has been looking for leadership. You have both Rathian and Sibelian, who have made their cases for why they should be leaders, and players got to pick sides there and unlock some cool rewards in the process of helping them. But as you go into our 10.0.7 update, for example, you will see that the other Black Dragon, Abyssian, develops a close bond with Emberthal and helps her in this quest to find their future. All these stories are really intertwined in the underground. Oh, shit! We have Abyssian now also becoming a factor within this story. Boys, we have a three-way tie for leadership of the Black Dragonflight. This is going to be a menage a trois. Not to be missed, to be fair. And then in contrast to that, we have the Blue Dragonflight story that takes place in other parts of the Dragon Isles. That's a chance to pick up from where we left off in the Dragonflight chapters. We saw that Caligos was attempting to get his flight back together, but he's only been able to pull a few pieces in. He felt like he still had a lot of work to do to make their flight feel more like it once did under Malygos long ago. So we'll get to adventure with Caligos and Sindragosa and delve into the past of the Blue Dragonflight, as well as set a course for its future. That's a really cool storyline that lets us get out to other places and do some adventuring and meet other characters, some of which you'll be familiar with. It was really cool to tell both these storylines within this Ember of Neltharion update. So I think that could be really cool. Since the players have been yapping about him, maybe during the history of the cow story. Since when did Abyssian get interested? Well, he's not interested yet, Mike, but he is now helping the Drakthir find their place in Azeroth, and that might actually lead him to become a sort of de facto leader. Jeremy from Wowhead, the raid will be simultaneously released again. You did that for the first time in Season 1. Did you like it so much that you decided to do it again, or was there a different reasoning for it? When we were talking about Dragonflight release, a lot of our conversations about the simultaneous release was about proximity to the holiday and our abilities to support the raid launch. Ultimately, after we saw how that played out, we had a lot of discussions about it. What were the cons? What were the pros? What were the cons? And what do we like and dislike? And we really felt like for the broader audience, it was such a great experience to not have to that frankly awkward week where the raids are open, but Mythic isn't open. So then if you're a Mythic Plus player, what level do I need to run? There's an awkwardness that would happen when we had the season launch, but not really launch. So having that alignment around the season launching felt like a great experience for the broadest audience. Yeah, I think I agree with that, right? Ultimately, it's never made sense to me why there's always been like this week break between normal, heroic, and mythic. So yeah, I think it's fine. Michael from MMO Champion, could you talk a little bit more about the UI updates that are coming in 10.1 and what player feedback has been like so far in Dragonflight? Embers of Neltharion is definitely going to have some major UI updates and improvements. This is aligned with the journey that we said we were going to embark on with our UI update. Where Dragonflight was just the beginning, there's so much stuff in the WoW UI that we really wanted to take another look at and really refresh. Some of the areas that you'll see improvements on possibly in the PTR later in the week, things like group management, raid frames, quest tracking, and how quests are displayed in the game. There are a lot of improvements to edit mode, which we know players have really enjoyed, but you know, very often we'll see feedback like, I wish I could do this thing in edit mode. So a lot of that feedback about edit mode that has been incorporated, like an edit mode plus. I believe there are also updates to the personal resource bars. I don't remember which ones off the top of my head, but we have updated some of the personal resource bars to be higher fidelity and really add some more polish to what some of those things are, like the Warlock one has had a ton of iterations done to it. Just take an opportunity to look at some of those other bars and add an extra bit of polish. Very much a continuation of the initial goal that we set for Dragonflight, and we're excited to get additional feedback on those new improvements. I will say I'm still using Alv UI. I have not used the baseline UI for World of Warcraft, just because Alv UI solves most of my issues. And there is still a lot of work with the baseline UI. I don't know if I'm going to go through this whole interview. This does not seem super fun. With the first patch, the outdoor world systems all seem to tie in really nicely and intentionally to Season 1. Is that as intentional as it seems? The outdoor world systems all seem to tie in. Landmass that's separate from the main Dragon Isles. How will you keep that sense of cohesion? To answer the first part of your question, yes, that was absolutely intentional to make the open world feel more like a living, breathing world. Lots of opportunities to do in some public events, like fishing for people to engage with. And when we were talking about the Embers of Neltharion and Zaralak Cavern, something that we discussed early on was, what is the experience like once the cavern is available? What percentage of my time should I expect to spend there? And based on a lot of player feedback that we heard, we really felt like we wanted to make sure that you still want to be in some of these zones that we launched Dragonflight with. They're so epic, they're so beautiful. True. We like that there's still more content that we could be adding to that space so players feel like they can spend time there as well. Off the top of my head, we're definitely going to be updating a lot of those public events as we don't want to leave those behind. We heard a lot of feedback from players about how enjoyable those are, and it would be sad if they weren't able to engage with them when the first big zone came out. Dude, the fact that Blizzard keeps thinking about the old zones, so good for the future of World of Warcraft. As Steve mentioned, one of those stories we're going to delve into is Zara Cavern, is what happens with the Incarnates. Ferric plunges into the caverns and finds essentially this molten lava pit to bathe in and become more and more empowered. And then he kind of flies out there and starts to wreak havoc on the world. And there are these Ferric assaults that will take place in existing Dragon Isle zones, kind of similar to what you might have seen with some of the Covenant assaults. So those will be existing in the zones, as well as adding new content to Zaralak Caverns that are more aligned with some of those public events. Okay. Greg from Shack News. One of the things that the community has been really asking about was they want their mounts to have dragon riding capabilities. Can you give some insights into the difficulties of this process? Normal mounts being dragon rideable. Let's see. We've heard that feedback loud and clear. We think it's a great idea as well. To your point, we're adding a new dragon riding mount. I forget the name of it, but it's like a long, slender mount. This will be introduced in the Zaralak Cavern, and there will be new customizations that you can earn through questing down there. We are adding to that library of dragon riding mounts that you can have more customization for. And in terms of applying dragon riding to pre-Dragonflight mounts, yeah, there are definitely challenges there. I would say first and foremost is just the animations required to make that work. Like the dragon riding rigs and models, there's a tremendous amount of time and effort to make that feel so visceral and awesome. There's a ton of effort that goes into making it feel as good as it is, and we want to make sure we're hitting that quality bar if we ever do that on existing mounts. So it's definitely something we've heard feedback on, and we've definitely asked that question ourselves, what are the challenges? But nothing to announce other than there is a cool new dragon riding mount, and we've definitely heard that feedback loud and clear. How would you guys feel? Do dragon riding on your normal mounts. You guys want that? All right. I can agree with that. Michael from Dot Esports asks, there are a lot of cool items in WoW, especially in Season 1, like the Elemental Lariat and Neltharion. There are also pretty epic and feel really sick when your character gets them. One of the main issues players encounter, though, is that items like those can become mandatory for certain specs pretty quickly. How do you balance really cool items that are fun and exciting with that feeling of making or breaking a spec? Itemization in particular is obviously something that our community talks about a lot, and we talk about a lot. Balance is something holistically that is discussed a lot. I think when we talk about it internally, we try to distinguish between class balance, like how hard does my class hit, how do we tune these talents versus each other, and we're pretty proactive there. We have very frequent tuning updates when it comes to class balance. But when it comes to items and rewards, often if there's an item that stands out above the rest, that just becomes a goal for you. That's just something that you're excited. To get and chase. So we try to be really careful about, especially post-launch, messing with the tuning there. But we definitely have conversations around that. And in terms of acquisition, that's one of the things I'm actually really excited for, to see how Dragonflight Season 2 plays out. We have a whole new pool of dungeons. There are all kinds of fun Mythic Plus trinkets that people love. And while in previous seasons you would essentially have to reacquire that same trinket season over season over season, there's an entirely new landscape of itemization for players to explore and discover, new items to chase rather than just knowing, okay, I'll get the puzzle box again this season. So that's something that we're really excited to see how that plays out, and is absolutely something that we discussed a lot. I didn't even think of this. The new dungeon rotation basically now breaks everyone's spec, and you have to re-itemize your entire spec with items that will not be available for you. Because remember, if there is a trinket that drops in, say, one of the dungeons that was just part of the Mythic Plus rotation, that trinket is not going to drop at a very high level for you in this rotation in Season 2. So you're going to have to figure out what new trinkets actually will I go for now to make my character very powerful. So I think that's good. I'd rather get new items instead of getting the same item for 2 years. D-Wolf, I agree with you there. I think this is good. Mr. Nemuria, obviously, I'm talking to Mythic Plus players here, not to Raiders. If you're a Raider, you're probably not using Mythic Plus trinket, unless it's like a completely broken one. You did mention the Lariat, so professions are getting a major update with Embers of Neltharion. There will be the ability to upgrade and bring a lot of those crafted items with you, as well as new recipes that are available. But you would, of course, have to earn the ability to upgrade the item level across some of those older items. They're not going to automatically upgrade. That's definitely something that we have discussed quite a bit. Nice change for professions. Actually, this is not completely related, but I think it's really cool, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. There's a new item upgrade revamp coming with the Embers of Neltharion. One of the things we identified with Dragonflight was that we really liked this idea of upgradable items and feeling like you can make progress, even if it's a couple of time levels at a time. You feel like you can earn some progression in your character and really work towards that end goal of yours. And what we found was there were a lot of different types of item upgrade systems. We have Valor, we have the ones in the outdoor world, we have Storm's Gear, and they all work in slightly different ways, and it felt like a lot of complexity and a lot of stuff the player had to wrap their head around that worked differently, even though they felt very similar with their end goal. So we're looking at introducing new currencies called Flight Stones, and then Shadowflame Crests, which is a currency that acts as your high watermark that will allow you to upgrade certain items to even higher tiers. That's a pretty exciting update that people will see. I don't know if it will be in the very first PTR build, but it will be pretty early because we've recognized that that's a big change and want to get that into players' hands as early as possible to get as much feedback as we can and allow time for iteration. Pretty decent. Jace from Windows Central. My question is about the lore and philosophy of the erosion of the faction war. It's really cool at the trading post to see Aethys finding an item to send to Jaina to repair the relationship after everything that's gone on over the years. Are you guys actively thinking about where PvP fits into the story post-faction war lore-wise? Here we go. We wouldn't have started undertaking any cross-faction grouping and systems without thinking through the lore implications and what it means to the world. Regardless of cross-faction guilds, we are still maintaining the identities of the Horde and the Alliance. Those are still organizations that exist in the world, and Stormwind and Orgrimmar will always be those bastions that represent those member races and feel like a home base for them. We don't want to lose that. The Horde and the Alliance have very different outlooks on life, which play out through the way they approach solving problems, and the kinds of characters you meet depending on which faction you're involved with. All of that stuff is important to maintain, and that is very fundamental to the DNA of the game. But at the same time, we're opening things up to allow the possibility for these cross-faction groups, and that's fundamental. Even going back to Warcraft 3, which was a story of cooperation in a lot of ways, of these two sides standing together against the threat of the Legion. We've seen that happen time and time again throughout World of Warcraft history, where some threat has arisen to our world and we've had to set aside our differences and band together and face that. Those differences still existed and they came to a head in Battle for Azeroth, but in the aftermath, we have been able to tell stories of those forces coming together. In Dragonflight, there is so much content that is available to every player, regardless of what faction they are, and we have things like conditional quest text in places that allow us to maintain some of that flavor, showing difference between the Horde and the Alliance, so we'll continue keeping that spirit. But in terms of the fiction of the world, it gives us a lot of opportunities in place to take the storyline that would be more limited if we had just a hardline of these two factions never being able to cooperate. Morgan can chime in on some of the PvP details of this. As I said already during the video for Mr. GM, I actually agree that this opens the door for a lot more potential storylines in World of Warcraft, or, you know, I think, at least in my opinion, I think it opens the door quite a bit. Like Steve was mentioning, that participation has been present for a long time. Yeah, that's just for PvP. Obviously, PvP is still going to be a thing. And there's even ways for Blizzard to make PvP a thing, even if there were no factions, or even if the factions were just cosmetic. PvP could still be a thing in World of Warcraft. There are ways, war games. You just literally, instead of calling it a battleground where, you know, players do battle, it's a war ground, right? Or a war game where the players aren't actually killing each other. They're just sort of testing their mettle against one another. All right, so Robin from MMORPG. I know we've talked a lot about the Black Dragon storyline and hit on some of the Blue Dragonflight, but will we get a continuation of the story of the other Dragonflights? I really liked how Ysera and Marithra's storyline was handled. Is the Green Dragonflight just hanging out for the patch and 10.1 patch cycle? One of the things that we're doing with the story is we do have a lot of Dragonflight. There's the 5 main flights and then some adjacent flights that have cropped up over the years that weren't part of the aspects, but still represent different flights of dragons. The launch of Dragonflight is expansive enough to allow us to set up some of those pieces in motion, but with our updates, we like to make them a bit more focused and tell a smaller number of stories in a deeper way. We certainly haven't forgotten about those flights. You will be seeing more about the Greens and the relationship between Marithra and Ysera. You'll see more about the Bronze coming up and all those kinds of things. But for Embers of Neltharion, it really was an opportunity to delve deep into the Black Dragonflight's legacy, resolve that, and also carry on with the stories we set up with the Blue Dragonflight. The other ones will get their time in the sun. Don't worry. Alright, it makes sense. If you were to tell every single one of the stories, every single patch, you'd probably... we'd have to wait years between patches, so that kind of makes sense. What are you both most excited about in Embers of Neltharion? What do you want players to perhaps take a step back and smell the roses and appreciate? Steve Danuser, being a story person, I can't help but be excited about being able to delve into kind of one of the biggest looming characters in all of Warcraft history, that of Neltharion to Deathwing. We have seen the effect he had on the world during Cataclysm, and this is a chance to go back and revisit that pathway that took him from being that noble Earthwarder to the breaker of the world. That's a really cool story that we haven't had a chance to tell before to this level of detail, and to be able to do it through the eyes of characters we care about, like Rathian, a fan-favorite character that has his own aspirations for what the future of his flight could be. Also, the fact that we were able to bring Sibelian back from Outland and really delve into him, what a tremendous character he has been. Then pull Abyssian from Highmount, and have him in the mix as well. It's been a great joy to delve into these characters, and I think this update really encompasses that sort of callback to some old favorite dungeons and raids like Blackwing Lair and Blackwing Descent and all that stuff, but see it through fresh eyes. That's all really exciting for me. Morgan Day, that definitely dovetails into my answer. I'm very much not so good at stopping and smelling the roses. I always like to do PvE content like Raids, Dungeons, Mythic Plus. For me, really, what Steve was just touching on, I think it's going to be so exciting to see Aberra's Laboratory, where this is the blueprint of what we saw with Blackwing Lair. I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little about flying in Zarlak Caverns. Will we need to re-earn it? Or will we be able to fly right in? We know that we'll be able to fly right in, so I'm not going to read the answer there. For Morgan, what is the item level for the various content features in patch 10.1, such as World Quests, Dungeons, and Raids? Will there be a new catch-up gear system for alt characters? For Steve, is there any Nosdormu love in 10.1? Mine is quickly and sadly disappointing. I actually don't remember the item level. Someone asked me this last time, and I said I would go look it up, and I forgot to. I'm unfamiliar with what the item level increases are. I imagine they'll look similar to what we've seen in previous expansions. All right, so that's fine. Steve Danuser, Nosdormu is certainly present, but this is a story that delves into the Black Dragonflight most prominently. Then there are the chapters that deal with the Blue Dragonflight. We want to parcel out those stories of a different flight. Okay, we've already heard him say that. Jeremy from Wowhead, are you able to share anything more about the class changes coming in 10.1? Are there possible reworks or any big changes to talent trees, since Dragonflight was the return of talent trees themselves? Very soon, I'm sure people have seen in the 10.7 content update that dropping March 21st, there was a very significant revamp of the Retribution Paladin. That was an area that we had a lot of feedback around and wanted to make some changes to. That really does align with the philosophy that we wanted to communicate at Dragonflight launch. The talent system was about building a really strong foundation that we can continue to improve and invest in moving forward. There will absolutely be updates that will happen in 10.1 Embers of Neltharion update, especially because, as we've discussed, there are levels of changes when it comes to classes that we feel are best made at a seasonal boundary. There's really a lot of integrity, and we try to uphold with our seasons like the PvP and Mythic Plus. We want to make sure that we're maintaining the integrity of that over the season. With Mythic Plus especially, if you made specific changes, it might be possible to completely upend what some of the leaderboards look like. So we try to be careful around that with smaller updates and seasonal boundaries. Okay, never mind. So there might be updates, but I don't think there's going to be any big revamp. Michael from MMO Champion, will we see any new character customizations added in this patch? I know that there are some hair colors and things like that coming in 10.0.7. It's for certain races like orcs and humans to get some new hair color that coincides with their heritage armor quest lines, but I'm not sure of any of the new customizations in Embers of Neltharion specifically. I'll have to check on that specifically. Greg Burke from Shack News, Worgen Tales. We're all Worgen Tales. Steve, I don't know what you're talking about. Worgen and tails make no sense to me. Dragon tails? Their dogs give them tails. All right. For those of you that care about customization, it doesn't seem like they have any specific plans yet. Side stories and time gating. It felt like over the course of Dragonflight so far, there's been a real emphasis on telling small stories throughout the patch. The number of side quests after the main story really built up the world and told more interesting side character stories, not necessarily the main characters. There was an emphasis on telling those stories across the patch, not just with the traditional time-gated quests, but more locked behind renown. It felt quite natural that the story progressed over the course of the last several weeks. What's the plan with this going forward in 10.1? You mentioned several flights, but is that story going to progress naturally? What are you going to do with the time gating of things? When we tried something new with Renown, unlocking these different quest chapters, which we had done some of that in Shadowlands, but having the multiple paths of Renown in Dragonflight, it felt like it gave players a lot more agency in how they wanted to engage with those different groups and what those rewards were for doing so. And so we do have a new renowned track in Zaralak with the Niffen, who are the cute little mole people that you'll be able to meet. They're small but mighty and have adventurous spirits packed into those little bodies, the big giant snoz on there. They rely on their sense of smell much more than their sense of sight. There are lots of cute jokes about Sniffen and Niffen there. With the update though, we will have some content that unfolds on a weekly basis, because part of that is as the raid unlocks, you need to kind of time some content to contextualize the new raid. In those cases, it makes sense to have it more based on timing rather than something the player does. I think all those options are open to using going forward. We'll try to make those decisions that best fit the feel of an update, and what the right cadence is for a patch can be different than for an expansion. Cosmetic glyphs in patch 10.0. Why can't we have more cosmetic glyphs? I actually think we're adding one for demon hunters in Embers of Neltharion, where you actually throw your own weapon with a glaive throw instead of the greener looking glaive. Alright, that's something, right? Thrall and his involvement with the Dragonflights. Alright, Cataclysm had a lot of focus on the aspects as well, and Thrall had a major influence in that expansion. We haven't seen much of him in Dragonflight, and I wanted to know if there was a reason for that. As a follow-up to that, it is difficult to write from a narrative standpoint. Is it difficult to write from a narrative standpoint to write a story and not crunch on the Hall of Fame Uther Thrall Arthas when moving forward with story-driven content? What is he talking about? Arthas was crushed, like, completely. What? It's definitely a balance. We try to pull in recognizable characters, as well as elevate some of the more B-level characters that you kind of know, but want to learn more about, as well as introduce new characters. That's always a process. We certainly talked about Thrall and his place as the stand-in Earthwater during Cataclysm, but with all the other Black Dragonflight stuff, we didn't feel like we really needed to tell that story right now. We do recognize that we do want to get back to Thrall and better define his place in Orc society and the Horde going forward. Look for that coming down the line in the future. Alright, so for those Thrall lovers out there, Thrall might make a return. Can you tell us where he is right now as of 10.0.7? He will be involved in the Orc Heritage questline, so you'll get to spend some Thrall time there. Alright. They don't have to kill Thrall anymore, Mike. Remember, what's his name is back, right? Chris Mason is back, so Thrall doesn't have to die anymore. The voice of Thrall is now working for Blizzard again, so it's fine. With Wild Elements, look, they're gonna have to bring Thrall back, because once Thrall rediscovers his connection to the elements, Thrall is undoubtedly one of the most powerful Earth Shamans, or Shamans, on Azeroth, right? Questrod, by the way, tier 1 sub, really appreciate it. Welcome to the most degenerate chat on Twitch. Thank you, fam. So yeah, I would say Thrall has to be back in this expansion. I don't think you can tell a dragon story without Thrall being present there.